Okay, my name is Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by the staff of the Service Design Studio, and Lance Haver will provide a report on last week's SEPTA meeting. So one of the things we're going to be doing this summer and into the fall is bringing you some explainers on how various city offices work. And what I'm seeing here is Denise Clay-Murray. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm okay. I'm battling a cold, but other than that, I'm good.
It sounds like it. Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that, Denise. So I'll do all the talking right now. So you
Okay.
save your voice, and then we'll talk in the second half.
Okay.
But we're going to be, I was just telling everyone, we're going to be bringing some reports on various city offices and what they do and how you can contact them. So this is something we're going to be doing throughout the rest of the summer as we make them and into the fall. So over the course of the rest of this year, hopefully we'll bring in about one a month about different offices and what they do and how you can reach them. So tonight we're going to start with something that not a lot of people know about. And that's why we started this one first. One of the things that sometimes after an episode of Hall Monitor, Lance, Denise, Vanessa, and I will, the cameras go off and we're still on this feed here, and we'll say, man, we didn't have any good news tonight. And sometimes it feels a little bad when that happens. Tonight we have some good news. And the good news is the Service Design Studio, what they do. Their goal and their charge is to improve city services. So how do they do that? Well, they're going to tell you about that tonight. Now, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty when we were filming this. So you're going to see a couple of things here where instead of somebody talking, it's them. It goes back to a live person talking. There was an issue with the microphones. I think it's going to be okay, but I just wanted to let everybody know about that. But this is a cool office, and they do some interesting things. So here is our interview with the Service Design Studio. We are speaking to the Service Design Studio for the city of Philadelphia, and I've been looking forward to this for a while now because I think this is a really interesting office with a really interesting mission. So with us, we have Davika Menon, Service Design and Delivery Practice Lead, Adrian On, the Community Co-Design Practice Lead, Kelsey Hubble, Communications, Engagement, and Outreach Manager, and Anita Reese, the Executive Director. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, and this is really fascinating to me. So we'll start right at the beginning here. How did this office come about? And what do you do?
Well, I'll probably tag team Devika for this because she's actually been with the city the longest. But essentially the work of service design, it's a practice. It's one of the design disciplines that exists in the realm of design. It's a fairly new practice here in the United States. It's been in Europe and New Zealand and Australia for decades. But essentially, our predecessor or the predecessor to my role, Leanna Dragaman, is the founding director of the Service Design Studio and really started at the city, I think, in 2014, and was doing a lot of, foundational principles of service design in her work, not labeled officially as such, but in her work with the redeployment or redevelopment of the phila.gov website at the time. And basically just sort of brick by brick built the case for establishing a service design studio along the way, created a fellowship, which sort of brought Devika into this space. But the studio essentially was formally founded in February of 2020, which is when I joined along with Andrea. But I'll pause, and Devika, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think the only thing to add there was like some of the, impetus for hiring designers in government came from like the redesign of the website, like Danita was mentioning. And, that was like a 3 to 4 year effort to build a government website that is resident centered, human centered. And so great, we now have like information that is accessible, but services on the ground are still broken, they don't function. And so I think like that was like, the nudge to like go broader and think about like services as a whole. How does information fit into someone's service journey? What is their experience when they arrive at, say, a city office? How do they interact with staff? Are staff supported? And so that is kind of like some of the thinking behind like why we saw the need to build a service design practice for the city. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned that some of the idea has been borrowed from maybe what's happening in Europe and some other places. What is like the philosophy there, though? Is it kind of, well, we want to make sure that we're getting every ounce of this we can when it comes to services? Is it streamlining, redesigning? What does that kind of look like?
Well, I think, we could talk about this for hours, but to start, for us, the way we see service design is the people most involved in the service should be the ones that contribute to the delivery and the creation of it. And so when you think about service design, in this context, we're in city government, there are really two main parties at play. There are the staff who deliver the services to residents, and then there are the residents who receive those services. And in our work, when we are essentially dissecting how a service operates from end to end, we think about how do you get those voices and the needs of those two voices most present in the formation or the improvement or the redesign of said services. And so for us, that means always going primarily as much as we can to frontline staff and residents, the people who are making the service happen along each chain or process of it being delivered. And then also simultaneously working with residents to understand what's working well with the service or what's not working well, what's missing. And then how do we sort of fuse those things together through a variety of approaches and tools that we use just as a part of a design methodology to be able to retool or create a service that actually delivers what people need. Because residents need to receive whatever it is that they need to receive from the city, but staff also need to be able to deliver it with relative ease and clarity. Yeah, what would y'all add?
Well,
Yeah.
and I see behind you, it says good services are designed. And I think that's a good motto here. And it's one of those things that when we talk about government or anything else, really, like you have to know what you're doing, but know how you're going to do it. I think is one of the key things. So, oh, go ahead.
Oh, Andrea just wanted to add something.
Yeah, thanks, Sunita. I think something to distinguish service design, because it gets confused with, graphic design, user experience design, all of these other disciplines. It's probably the broadest of our, design disciplines in the sense that encompasses all of those things. So when I say that, we are considering, and usually you see service design show up in really complex systems, healthcare systems, governments, any sort of space where there are maybe many silos or many parts interfacing with each other, right? And so our outputs are not always digital. They are not always a website or an application. They can be forms. They can be the way that people, engage with those forms, but also how staff process those forms and how those forms interact with the systems that they, need to use on a daily basis. Or it could be signage, or it could be, an experience like how a service provider even greets you, right? So how can that be a trauma-informed experience? And so I just want to emphasize that, sometimes those things, good services are designed, right? Services, it can be very broad, that experience. And so we touch upon all the things that make a service good, right? Or could make a service good.
Well, and it's interesting because there's something in the back of my mind that I guess I'll bring it up now. This sounds like an interdisciplinary approach. And it would seem to me that, like, if you're talking about like the city treasurer's office, right? Accountants, finance people, that kind of thing, law enforcement. experts, attorneys. With your office, I would think you'd have a whole group of people from different backgrounds looking at it differently, because that's how if everybody had the same background, you'd have the same product and there wouldn't be a lot of changes. Do you find that within your office, you have people maybe from a government background, a design background, who knows, psychology, whatever? How does that work? And is that part of what you look for when you're putting this team together?
I can
Take it.
start, but
Yeah.
yeah, feel free to jump in. Yeah, I think like our team, we are designers, service designers. We come from like different design adjacent backgrounds. However, we are not subject matter experts in policy design, service delivery, administering complex programs and services. And so that's why Danita mentioned, like we work in close partnership and collaboration with people who are subject matter experts. And so the way that we see our role is to help facilitate this design process that involves research, collaborative design, decision-making, testing before like we implement any new improvements. And we work in close collaboration with people who have deep expertise in these different services. So our team partners with different offices at the city to help them improve how they run their services using like a collaborative service design approach.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would add is that we're situated in the office of the chief administrative officer who sort of oversees, and that actually affords us the ability to be able to partner with so many different departments. Because this office itself essentially is a cross-functional office that aims to do this kind of work. And so for us, I think when when Leanna and Devika were sort of building this team and recruiting all of us, they were looking for folks, across sort of the design diaspora, but also, you want people who are systems thinkers. Like my background's not a traditional design one. I sort of stumbled into it being like, oh, I thought I was just being nosy. And now I have tools to really understand how to actually look at a problem holistically and figure out, how do you improve process? How do you understand what channels information travels through? How do you understand people and networks and things of that nature? And so all of those components, like within us as individuals, come together across a team that actually enables us to be able to look at, services from as close to a 360-degree possible, because everyone is bringing their lived experience, which is something that, is a part of our team's core values. We need people to show up and share the full capacity of like what they know and what they've experienced and been through and navigated, because that actually makes our work richer. It enables us to make more connections across the silos that Andrea was referencing. So, we want people that have, a certain set of skills, but then we also look for what are people's capacities, what are their interests, what other industries have they been in? I feel like in a lot of ways, we use a lot of gardening metaphors when we're talking about our work, but I think of us sometimes as bees or butterflies or other entities that have to sort of cross-pollinate. And that's also an equally important skill that we need people to have, because you can go from working on a project with L&I for a few months, and then you're switching and suddenly you're working on a project with the Department of Labor or something like that. And so, it's a really cool ability to be able to have the exposure that the Office of the CAO allows us to have, and then fuse that with whatever lived expertise you bring to your role.
Being nosy is a great trait to have. That's why I have this job. So
that's how I explain it to my mom, because she still does not know what a service designer does. And so I'm use the word nosy to be like, I'm very nosy about particular things.
But to also, the technical side
Yes.
of our craft, right? And again, like sometimes sometimes folks are confused, and we have a design research, a very rigorous design research and evaluation sort of like component to our work, because we're trying to understand root cause. We're trying to understand who are all the players, right? Who may not even be aware that they are impacting a service, right? That, L&I's work is speaking to another facet of a service, that people are actually bouncing between these services to make it whole for themselves, right? So there's that aspect of it. There's also the strategy piece for us, right? We're design strategists. We're trying to like manage time, like future of where services, need to go in terms of being equitable, in terms of being holistic, and where we are in terms of our current budget and what is feasible. And then there's this other facet of how do we actually create prototypes? How do we actually create experiments to make sure that our theories are actually feasible and work for folks, and that our ideas are going to be able to be scaled. So like in terms of like our our technical abilities and who we're bringing, there's like a bit of humanities, there's a bit of research evaluation, there's design, and there's engagement, and there's sort of this concept for us that social justice, there's like service design as a social justice issue, because, in a democratic sort of government, what, is owed to the public and residents is good services, is their well-being. And so, I think all of that kind of comes together. So we have community organizers, that's my background. And so it's like this whole, it's like nosy, of course, and then all these things, right?
Yeah.
Because, you gotta drive home the impact.
Well, and it's interesting too, because I imagine, and I do it too, that if you work in a department or in any kind of line of work, it becomes a little myopic, right? You're looking at what you do, maybe not necessarily what everybody else is doing, and then have somebody like you come in and say, by the way, when you do it this way, it could affect this and that. Yeah, I think that's really important, and really the holistic aspect of this is really interesting. How do you identify the projects that you undertake?
Projects come to us in a variety of ways. There's a traditional pipeline of, the chief administrative officer says, hey, there's this thing with this department and they need your help. There's another initiative that Mayor Parker signed on her first day in office that our team really was the inspiration for. It's the Better Services Initiative. And so, projects come to us through that mechanism as well. We also find and seek our own projects by having conversations like the one that we're having with you, with our colleagues. Historically, we've been able to do a lot of meet and greet, and, other folks saying like, hey, have you met this team? They do really interesting and cool work. And so we can have initial conversations that lead to, actually, I think it'd be cool if we partnered on something. And so we have projects that come to us that way as well. And there's probably another way that I'm missing, but those are three of the main pipelines for how we get into our project work.
Do you find that if something comes across your desk that maybe San Francisco did or Albuquerque did, that you might say, well, let me forward this off to this person just so they can see it?
We have done that, right?
Yeah, we do that all the time, I feel like.
Yeah.
And it's great when it comes back to us or people like, have you ever thought about working in this way? But that we take a lot of inspiration from what other, folks doing at all levels of government in this country and beyond, and try to sort of filter out. We use those sort of as leverage points at times to be like, hey, we should pay people to participate in the work that we're doing. New York does it. As a leverage point for then, oftentimes folks will say, oh, really? Like we should look into that. We should create something. And from that, something like what we now have in the Resident Engagement Fund exists as a result of us sort of thinking, we have an idea of how we think something that needs to happen. There's a policy change that might need to come about. And oftentimes it is looking at some of our other cities for inspiration to say, this is possible, it can be done. Oftentimes, we reach out to those folks, cold call, or we see them at conferences, or, fortunately, we've got an amazing network of current and former colleagues and just advocates and champions that will connect us with folks where we can say, San Francisco, how did you stand up, this program or this initiative, or how do you go about doing this kind of work? And it definitely helps inform and inspire us. So it's something we do quite often.
How many projects do you work on at a time?
What is time? No,
Right.
We have sort of a model that
We do
we're
have a model,
starting to,
yeah.
um,
You want to talk about it?
you know, our work is so deep and often engages so many people. Sunita and I worked on a project for some years where we were collaborating or engaging 200 some internal, external stakeholders. And so we've kind of identified that for a senior level strategist holding like one project and then, maybe consulting with departments in a way that is advancing like very key deliverables for them. That's sort of how we're structured. So, a senior strategist maybe leading one core project of the department and consulting with two others. And so that is kind of the model that we were moving towards and have been experimenting with and has worked well. We've never been a bigger, like this big of a team. And so for many years, it was, us and a few others just
Yeah.
advancing as much work as we could, holding as much as we could through the pandemic. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
now we're living into this, but I don't know.
Yeah,
No.
it's also
Yeah.
like, we don't like quantify it
Yeah.
sometimes in this way because some projects are at different levels, right? Like a project could be like help this department reimagine their intake process, and the output is like redesign a couple of forms and like a staff workflow. That project is not as intensive as like the toolkit project that Andrea was mentioning, which is like a 3-year systems mindset transformation effort, which requires more investment, more energy. And so we try to like at any given time, we try to take on like one like deeper systemic level project and like a couple of, different levels of like improvements so that we're trying to make change, not just at like the surface level, but also change at like deeper levels. And when you think about that, it's like, yes, I can redesign a form in like a couple of weeks, but thinking about what is going on that form, where that form fits into someone's process, what workflows is it connected to? Are there policies that dictate what is on the form? Do people need to be trained on like implementing the form? All of these things take time. So we make sure that anything that we create is actually sustainable beyond the scope of our work with departments. So when
Really unfair question here. In 2 minutes, can you take one of those completed projects and walk me from how you got it to start with and then how it got completed?
when we get a project, one of the projects that we worked on was with the Office of Homeless Services. That was funded through a grant that we got from the Knight Foundation. So the way that that project arrived was a little different, but we partnered with the Office of Homeless Services intake service to make that service more trauma informed for people experiencing homelessness and the staff who support them. We conducted months of field research at intake centers with outreach workers, at after-hours centers, spoke to a lot of different folks to understand what their experience was interacting with the city service. From there, we worked with staff again at these different centers to figure out opportunities, identify ideas that they had to improve the service. We worked with the department to prioritize a couple of ideas that they were interested in moving forward and implementing. And then from there, we identified 4 distinct projects to, again, with the goal of making this service more trauma-informed. So one of the projects that we implemented was redesigning a lot of informational materials, everything from one-pagers, forms, signage, website information, phone message scripts. Everything was redesigned to, one, address challenges that people were facing when interacting with the service, and then adopting trauma-informed best practices. Another project that we worked on where we partnered with an architecture firm was to reimagine how the intake center physical space could be redesigned to support people in moments of crisis. And so we came up with floor plans, the architects developed renovation plans, and actually the office had some money to eventually implement some of the recommendations that were made to the physical space. Another project was interactions between residents and staff. And so we worked with a trauma expert Dr. Megan Corrado, who helped us reimagine these really crucial moments between city staff and residents accessing the service to make sure that they were trauma informed, and then also developed a lot of training for staff to be able to adopt these practices across all of their work. And then we also left the director and the larger department with a lot of like strategic recommendations that they could use to inform.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us and for giving us some of your time. I've always seen, one of the things that I've always noticed about Philadelphia is that that's the way we've always done it. Seems to be the first phrase out of anyone's mouth when you talk about making a change to anything. How have you managed to do what you do while navigating that mindset?
It's challenging, but I think one of the biggest ways we've been able to do it is because collaboration is such a key component of the way that we work. You know, when we say collaborative, we mean it in every sense of the word. We work in the open with our colleagues. And so from the very first moment when we're having a conversation, if we're taking notes, 9 times out of 10, we're sharing that document, and either it's on the screen if we're meeting virtually and you're seeing folks type live, or, you know, after that, we're sharing it with you. But like, as we move through every stage of our work, we're telling you what we want to do. We're inviting you in to say, do you agree? Do you have other ideas? What do you want to do? Like, what makes the most sense? And as we go about doing the actual work of whatever that is, whether it's research or when we're prototyping, those folks are with us, deeply embedded in doing the work of meeting us, being like, well, I think this, or we've tried that before, and this is what happened, or maybe we should try this other approach. We've never been able to talk to people in the disability community about this thing. So can we try to figure out how we can communicate with those people? And so I think because we are in open collaboration, it takes longer because, you know, there's all of this rapport, or not all the time take longer, but most of the time we have to build that rapport and that relationship with each other. But through the course of that, what our colleagues are able to experience is a new way of working. And it doesn't take very long for them to get involved, or, you know, into our Miro boards or whatever, where there's sort of the curiosity. Because even for as much as Philly folk will say, this is the way we've always done it, if they're like, but there's a better way, I mean, I'm curious. I'm not going to say I'm buying in, but I'm willing to come and meet you for this meeting for 30 minutes to see what you're up to. And by the time the 30 minutes goes, then we're at an hour and they're invested. And so now they're engaged in doing that work. And so for me, from my perspective, that's a huge component of how we're able to shift mindsets, because change is constant, even when we want to deny that that is the case. Even when we feel like we know there's no other way to go about doing something, what we invite people in to do is to just see, like, what is the possibility for change, and what might it look like if you were able to do this faster or in a totally different way, or if it wasn't all on just these 1 or 2 people that it's always been on. You know, what does it look like to rethink how you approach your work and how to deliver something or how to receive it? And, you know, people are really overwhelmingly open to that. It just takes a little time to be willing to engage with people as people.
Now, do you all do your work just for the organizations and departments that are controlled by the administration, or does that work branch out into other components? Like, say, someone at city council comes to you and says, hey, we have this system that we, you know, are looking at, and we're wondering why it can't be more effective. Can you help us?
We've not experienced that instance. And so historically, our team has been focused, you know, we work largely with departments inside the city, again, because of where we're situated within the CAO. It's not to say that that never could happen, but that is an entirely different way of sort of managing about how a project would take place. Because obviously the relationship between council and city departments is what it is. And so it's not to say that it's not possible or that we would never be open to it. We are, but that's never been brought to us as of yet.
Now, you also talk about the community's place in this. How do you get the community involved? to help with this, to kind of get their input? And how do you get the community involved?
So, oh, all right. Am I coming through clear? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say that first and foremost, we serve the public and community, right? So we partner with departments in order to serve the public, ensure these services work for them. And so when we say that we collaborate with the people most impacted, I think, part of our work in this sort of phase of trying to understand who all the players are, who will be most impacted by the decisions made through the design process, oftentimes that leads to us discovering or realizing that, hey, there are community member voices, there are people that are not at this table that really should be either informing or really deciding some of these key decisions. And so, through invitation, and again, we're very sensitive to the fact that there are relationships that have been broken historically prior to us being here, or even while we're here, right? Or the ways that we show up, and that is not, there's the perception of power, and then there's actual power, and then there's everything around it, right? And so sometimes folks are community is very open to working with us. Sometimes we have existing relationships. They've seen us in community. They've seen the work we've done, or they can see the artifacts of our work. And there's some bridge, right? So we can build trust. Sometimes there is nothing to stand on, and folks do not want to work with us, right? And that is something we also honor. And we try to find ways to then ensure that their voice, or in this current moment, to just be very, very specific, right? There's a lot happening in the realm of immigration and ICE and the federal level. And sometimes all of that is rightly so collapsed, right? And so we're trying to serve immigrant communities, undocumented communities, and it is not ethical really for us, nor will communities come speak to us. And so we try to make sure that those perspectives maybe are being included through community partners, right? People who are navigators, people who support those communities. And so, really nuanced ways of inviting folks in, but we always either seek an invitation or we, provide one, and we just honor however folks want to or don't want to show up.
Okay. Now, I mentor a lot of college kids. And because I mentor a lot of college kids, some of them are trying to figure out what it is they want to do for the rest of their lives. If you were a student watching this, how would you get started in becoming someone who does what you do? I don't know what classes you would actually have to take or anything, but if you were trying to show someone how to get into what you do, what would that process look like? Are you on mute?
I would say, this is biased because this is my take, so you'll need to hear from the other two. But pursuing, like, I remember my parents being like, the humanities, like, don't do that. Don't study that. How are you gonna make a living? But I would encourage people, you need that well-roundedness that comes from studying across disciplines. So however you can, pick that up, to not be so quick to want to laser in on just one area of focus, is really critical, because, as a service designer, you need to be able to think holistically. And so you need to be able to look across and to be willing to go really deep into things. I think so, for me, having sort of a liberal arts kind of approach or background, or an openness to that, enables you to be really curious across disciplines, across people, across, all of the different channels that you'll encounter, or the, aspects of service design, when you're really looking at what the current state of something is and trying to understand it, and then figuring out how do you build to the future. So you need to be interested in things from like a scientific standpoint, or to Andrea's earlier point, having some really solid technical skills, especially if they're in the realm of design, is important, but it's not the only thing that's going to serve you. You need to know how to build relationships with people. You need to know how to make honest invitations when you're trying to invite people in, particularly when they are from vulnerable populations. So you got to have some, humanity and some savviness and to be able to do that. So that's what I would say. I would encourage people to be open to taking different classes, to not really being so quick to lock into just, I'm going to be an engineer and that's the only thing that I'm going to do. And I'm only taking these electives because I have to. But to remain open and curious to, if music's your bag, let it take you somewhere, because those things will then come back into play. I had a harmonica class in my senior year of college. I just took it because I was like, sounds interesting and cool. And what it taught me was a lot about improvisation and what it means to have to make adjustments in real time when someone's lip is busted and they can't play their part. So, all of those things are deemed sometimes as soft skills, but they really come into play when you're in an environment, particularly one like this government context, where in a city like Philadelphia, relationships are really important and you need to know how to do that. And then you need to have skills that you can rely on to actually take you through the course of your project work.
Did anyone else want to answer? Okay.
That was well said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us.
All right. We'd like to thank the staff of the Service Design Studio for joining us on the show. I thought that was really interesting. And again, one of those good stories where you're hearing about people who are looking to improve city services. Now we'll switch gears a little bit, and we have a video from Lance Haber. Lance will not be on the show tonight, but he sent this video in about last week's SEPTA meeting. So here's Lance's video.
As you mentioned at the start of the meeting, we are just 30 days away from the first wave of devastating service cuts that will go into effect without action in Harrisburg on transit funding. We are all hopeful that an agreement will be reached, and we are continuing to work closely with lawmakers and Governor Shapiro to achieve that goal. I want to thank everyone on the board for their ongoing work and support. However, we have no choice but to turn more of our focus to completing tasks necessary to prepare for the rollout of the first wave of service reductions on August 24th. This includes the elimination of 36 bus routes and cuts of 20% across all services. Since our fiscal year began on July 1st, planning has been ongoing to prepare our operations for the potential drastic service cuts beginning exactly 1 month from today. Many of those activities have been occurring behind the scenes, but they are now intensifying and becoming more public. Staff have worked to create 2 sets of schedules for all service modes, one set based on current service levels and another reflecting a 20% across-the-board service cut. Internally, our process is underway for scheduling operators and other personnel so that their work schedules match up with the reduced service schedules. Today, we started putting up signs at the 3,000 bus stops across the system that will be eliminated. I am visiting our bus districts to meet personally with our operators, and intensive employee engagement is underway to ensure personnel are familiar with how the cuts will change routes, including eliminated stops and rerouting. There is no standard operating procedure to follow here. Not only has SEPTA never implemented service cuts on this scale, it is unprecedented for transit as a whole. This will be extremely disruptive to our customers. We know that tens of thousands or more will be left with no viable public transportation options.
My name is Lance Haber. I have 2 questions. One, how much per month will the 20% across the board cuts save SEPTA?
$5 million per month.
My second question is, today, as we sit here and stand here, how much money is in the Service Stabilization Fund?
$396 million.
So can you help me do the math? If you postponed the cuts until after the budget, would there be enough money in the stabilization fund to cover the $5 million a month?
Mr. Abram, we answered the 2 questions. We're not going to do that. So
I didn't hear.
We're done answering questions, and you can continue with your remarks. I gave you 2 answers to questions. This isn't a press conference.
Okay. it's very difficult because you continue to say you can't do anything else. And that's factually untrue. You don't have to do these things. There's enough money to keep the system operating. You will not be arrested if you don't do it. You will not go to jail. You will not be beaten by mobs. You will not suffer any consequence. You can save the SEPTA riders from these cuts by simply standing up and having a backbone and saying, we are not going to harm the riders in the Delaware Valley. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Irving. This is Mike Carroll. I'm a board member for one of the two board members for the city of Philadelphia. So I just want to, maybe for your benefit, but also for folks listening in, talk about what I've learned a little bit about what we call the rate stabilization fund here at SEPTA. I know you're familiar with the way the rate stabilization fund works at the water department, for instance. It's considered best practice for any large organization that depends on revenues like rates or fares to maintain a rate stabilization fund so that they can get funding, financing, maintain low rates of interest. Except it's a little bit different, and the way that we use it here is more like a checking account. So the second question you asked is kind of difficult to ask because we don't know what costs are going to come up. There's some things that are budgeted, but things come up all the time. And that cash needs to be on hand so that SEPTA doesn't borrow money or end up with no money to pay for things that come up that are unpredicted. So we have to maintain some level of rate stabilization fund in order to do that. It just doesn't work as a business otherwise. So it can't go to zero. There's no scenario where we can spend it down to zero. And we get information from experts in the field that tell us where it should be. And we're right at that line at any given point in time, even on a good day. So we don't really have a lot of slack to spend it down below where we're at right now. And when you start to do that, it becomes much harder incrementally, but then it's severe to run the business you're trying to run. So I can appreciate that at the surface level, it seems like there's this pot of money that you can just draw down and down and down, and you don't need to make hard decisions. But that's not how SEPTA works. SEPTA's just not set up that way.
I understand that the chairman doesn't want me to respond, so I'm going to sit down. Simply to say it's just not true what you said.
And it isn't. We've been having these conversations for a long time now. And one of the most important things that came out of that whole exchange is that these drastic cuts that SEPTA is going to make will save them $5 million a month. $5 million a month. So you couldn't wait an extra month?
Well, when you look at how the state is, as of today, the state budget is a month late. And there seems to be no hurry on the part of the folks in Harrisburg to come up with a 2026 fiscal year budget. Now, that could be for a number of reasons, but there just seems to be no urgency on the part of the state to come up with a budget. But, for the imposition you're going to put on riders, and there's going to be a lot of people who either can't get to work or can't get to work, in a timely fashion, or have to spend more of their money to get to work, because Uber and Lyft are going to be on surge pricing all day, every day once these cuts come to fruition, because they know they'll be able to make the money. So, for $5 million a month, $60 million a year, that doesn't even begin to close the deficit that you all have.
Right. But they have the money in the stabilization fund. $60 million for minus 400, or 400 minus 60 still leaves them with $340 million in there.
Right.
I don't understand why this has to be such a problem. To me, it doesn't seem like, to me, this seems like an easy decision. the thing that was a little bit of a straw man there is when they say, well, we can't bring this down to zero. We can't bring the stabilization fund down to zero. Nobody's asking you to do that.
Even if you took the $213 million that is your deficit and you paid that with the rate stabilization fund, you would still not be at zero.
No, they'd have almost half of that money still there. A little less than half of what they have now. And I'm not saying they necessarily need to do that right now, but you don't need to cut you don't need to cut all the things that you're talking about cutting. And, that only, and when I say only, it's relative, and it only saves $5 million a month. We'll take the $5 million from the stabilization fund for this month and see if Harrisburg gets the budget passed. If they don't, does it hurt to take another $5 million? Because I think it hurts a lot more to say, well, we're cutting 20% of the service. I think that's a major issue. And I have a 4.5-year-old here. Denise, can you vamp for me while I deal with this?
Well, here's the thing. You have $5 million a month, a year that they're going to save from this. And yet you're going to cut all of these bus routes and things. And part of the reason why SEPTA feels the need to do this in the first place is because its ridership has not gotten back to the level it was pre-pandemic. If you think that cutting all of these service routes is going to get your riders to come back to you, it's going to have just the opposite effect. You're going to have fewer people wanting to ride because there's going to be fewer opportunities for them to ride. And there are some bus routes, like say the 23. The 23 is a big bus route. It's such a big bus route, it had to be split in half. The same thing with the 4 and the 16. That used to be the C route. What happens? I mean, and if I'm like a senior citizen in a wheelchair, and you're going to tell me that for me to catch my bus, I have to go another 3 or 4 blocks when the bus stop that I used to be able to get my bus at was maybe a block away or right in front of my house. I just have to wonder if the mostly suburban makeup of this board, of the SEPTA board, I have to wonder if that is playing into how they're doing this. Because if you notice, the regional rail lines and all of those things, those aren't going to be cut until later on in the year.
Right.
But the people who pay the most into SEPTA are going to lose their service first. And somehow I don't think that's fair. And I really don't think it's fair that you have one of the 2 members of the board representing the city co-signing this.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? It's going to hurt Philadelphia first. One of the biggest problems I have with this, and I'm a little surprised this hasn't been a bigger. First of all, I'm surprised these SEPTA cuts haven't been a bigger deal throughout the city. You don't really hear a lot about this, or as much as I think you should be hearing about it. But one of the big problems here is the service after 9 o'clock that they might be cutting. A lot of people who won't be able to afford a car or another way to work rely on that to get to work at night. What are they going to do? What are they supposed to do?
Well, like I said, Uber and Lyft are going to make a killing.
And
because
these
folks are going to need to get home. Yeah. But if you've ever taken Uber or Lyft during surge pricing, that's not cheap. No. And this stands to hurt the city in a lot of ways. Like, for example, the first football game, the first NFL football game of the year is the Eagles and the Cowboys at Lincoln Financial Field. It's the very first game of the season. And it's a night game. It's not even going to start until 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I'm really having a problem with the fact that the main people who pay into SEPTA are going to be the ones hurt first.
Yeah.
And I also have a problem with the fact that nobody from Philadelphia's political class is saying to their brothers and sisters in Harrisburg, get a move on, get this budget passed, get us the funding we need, stop poking around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lance reported that there wasn't anybody from city council or the state delegation in Harrisburg at this meeting. That's astounding to me. That this is huge.
And the thing is, like, the day after these cuts are supposed to go into effect, the next day is the start of school for the school district of Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So that's going to show you how big a mess this stands to be right off the bat. When you have all of these school kids, and I'm not just talking about public school kids, I'm talking about kids in charters, I'm talking about kids in private schools, parochial schools, because the district is responsible for transporting them to and from school.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is going to be a mess because there's not going to be as much availability to get kids to and from school, and not every parent has a car.
Right. And not every parent's available to do this maybe in the morning or maybe in the afternoon. You know, it's really crucial that SEPTA exists for well, I'm going to say everybody, because even if you don't use it regularly, it's really important that it exists so other people don't have to drive all the time. And now you're going to have more congestion on the streets. It's going to lead to a myriad of problems here. All across the region.
And what I also find interesting is that most of the people that make up that board probably have not gotten on a thing of public transit in the last 10 years.
Right.
So you have people who really don't have any experience with the system making these decisions. And it shows a level of tone deafness that no one should aspire to.
No, and again, it's very surprising to me that we've gotten to this point. Maybe it shouldn't be, but again, what surprises me the most is the lack of outrage that we're seeing from the political class. I've had conversations with people. And this isn't a knock on anybody, because this is, but I've asked a few people, like neighbors and friends and things, how much do you think these SEPTA cuts will save SEPTA per month?
Mm-hmm.
And people are like, oh, it's got to be a lot, $30-40 million. And well, no, it's just $5. It's just $5. And again, I'm sorry I keep coming back to this, but to me, this is an easy decision. You take $5 million and you make it keep working for a month until we know what Harrisburg is going to do. Then if you have to make cuts, I'm not saying you do it, but then at least you kept it going for a while. Because this is the thing that could happen, right? Harrisburg might very well give them the money. It could happen.
Well, so far, the only thing that Harrisburg has wanted to do in terms of SEPTA is put more regulations on it.
Right.
They want more oversight over the system. And I'm like, okay, because you being in charge of things in Philadelphia has worked so well for us in the past. School District of Philadelphia, hello. When you all ran it, you ran it into the ground. And
I think
I'm
purposely.
not sure if we handed you the parking authority, and the school district still hasn't gotten the money it was supposed to get from that.
Right.
So you'll have to forgive me if, when the state starts talking about, particularly our lawmakers from suburban Philadelphia who probably wouldn't know a SEPTA bus from a Greyhound bus, when they start introducing things, oh, well, we need to put more regulations on. You don't know. You have shown us in the past that you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
So since you don't know what you're doing, maybe you're not the person that should be regulating this. Maybe it should be regulated by the people who actually use it. And
Yeah.
maybe instead of coming up with more regulations, especially since there's no money attached to them, how about giving us some money?
Well,
You know,
and that's the thing, right? Like, if Harrisburg wants more of a say in this, it comes down to the same problem we're having with the SEPTA board. 80% of them don't live in the city.
Exactly. And that is the part about the SEPTA board that has always bothered me.
Yeah.
The people who stand to be impacted the most by the board, or by what this board does, are the least represented.
Yeah.
And the people who are most represented are the people who could care less.
Yeah.
So I'm like, no, we shouldn't give you any more power. You need to give up some money if you want more power.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, again, it's the same representation issue where it's a bunch of people who don't live here making decisions for us here.
Right.
And we can make the arguments about, well, let's go all the way with it. Gun control. Right? So the city of Philadelphia can't write its own gun laws because of preemption at the state level. Well, to me, that's insane. I mean, the state has a function, right? State government has a function. I respect that, and I support that to a certain degree. But when it comes to life and death issues here in the city, we need more say over that. And it doesn't have to affect the other parts of the state that don't necessarily want that kind of thing. I don't understand why, but that's just to give an example. Philadelphia is the number one county with the highest incidence of gun violence per capita in the state. But number 2 and 3 are very close to us, just by a fraction of a percent, and they're the 2 most rural counties in the state. So it's not like we're asking for anything crazy here. This is a problem that everybody is affected by when we're talking about like gun violence, and that's just an example of state control where maybe it shouldn't be there. Maybe we should have more say on that than the rest of the state does.
Well, that is why I often say to people that no one is ready for me to become mayor of Philadelphia. Because my very first press conference would have the state police at my door, because it would be the press conference in which I announced that the city of Philadelphia is no longer paying state taxes. Since you don't want to help us make sure our schools are straight, since you don't want to make sure our mass transit is good, since you don't want to make sure that our people can, work for a living wage, we're going to keep our money and do it for ourselves. And you do what you can with what you make from the farm show and the Pittsburgh Steelers. But we'll be keeping all of our stuff, including the world champion Philadelphia Eagles, to ourselves, and we'll be straight. But we're tired of you.
So you would create the 51st state of Philadelphia.
Exactly. We would be the United States of Philadelphia.
Oh, we'd be our own country.
Yes, because I'm tired of this.
Well,
we'll pay our federal taxes because we're good citizens that way. But the state would get nothing. It would be like that line in The Color Purple when Miss Seeley says to Mister, "Until you do right by me, everything you think about is gonna fail." And that would be my exact attitude toward the state, which is why no one is ready for me to be mayor of Philadelphia.
I'm going to write you in next time, Denise. Well, and we're going to have to leave it there. And we have a lot of good stuff planned for the rest of the summer and into the fall. It's going to be really interesting. But if there are things you want to know about, you let us know at Hall Monitor. Okay, go to our website, send us a message. So we will see you next week on Hall Monitor.